Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webcast. My name is Paul Ragusa, and I'm the editor with Locksmith Ledger. Really excited to be moderating this webcast, School Security in Focus. It's a very important topic, of course. I also want to thank our sponsors. We couldn't do this without you, uh, so thanks to our sponsors. And then I also want to introduce our great panel. So there's many of these, several of these panelists need no introduction, but I will give you a quick background on each of them. Rick Fox, he is the higher ed security consultant and owner of Fox Locks and Security Services. Wayne Winton, he's the owner of Tri-County Locksmith Service. Guy Grace is the chair for Partner Alliance for Safer Schools and also the National K through 12 director for ASSA ABLOY. And then moving on to Ron Shaffer, he is industry solutions leader in the education area for Salto. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this. Let's jump right into the first question. I'm going to start with you, Guy, on this, and then we're also going to give you a chance to talk about, of course, the new past guidelines that are about to come out, the 7th edition. But we'll start with just where we are right now with school security, where it's going. I'm going to move over to this slide just because it's a good visual for everyone to look at some of the trends that have been identified. But Guy, I'll start with you on this one.
Well, thank you. And first of all, I'm honored to be here. And anyone that's attending this program, we all have a stake. And I thank everybody for helping to keep our nation's schools safe. When we look at schools in the United States, you've seen one school, you've seen one school. Right now, we have over 98,000 public schools across the country, and we have about another 28,000 private schools, and we have about 13,000 school districts across our great country. So when we look at that, you've seen one school, and the trends in school safety can vary from community to community, from school to school. And what we're seeing in K through 12 is a trend towards unified life safety components. Now, that can be technological, that can be architectural, but most importantly, that can be with our human roles and processes. Empowering the school learning environment is so important on a day-to-day basis. For example, if teachers cannot teach, they can't teach feeling fear, and students can't learn feeling fear as well. So what we talk about today is unifying life safety components together to promote that learning environment. So when we look at the trends in K through 12 security, we see the unified security and life safety systems. And that, as I mentioned, would include human roles and processes, but also how human roles and processes use the components of safety and security, such as doors and hardware. So that includes locks. And we see a lot of that going, probably one of the number one security improvements we see in national trends across our country is what we call security entrances or vestibules. And we look at that in K through 12 trends across our country. That is where we're seeing a lot of improvements being done and in school safety and unifying life safety technology with access controls in the vestibules. The other area would be around Alicia's law or dress system. And when we look at that across our country, many states are implementing legislation that requires school districts to unify with dress systems and empower their staff and students with a dress or panic alarm system. However, when we look at dress systems, they cannot stand on their own without being unified with other technology components such as access control and video management systems, mass notification, communication, but most importantly, the human element. Another one we see quite often with trends in K through 12 is weapons detection. Now, weapons detection could be your standard metal detection, the old style that we've seen in K through 12. But weapons detection is going into AI, for example, and implementations through a video management system or AI at the front door in combination with metal detection at the schools. Another sign we see is Mapping of schools. Mapping of schools has been around since the 1990s after Columbine, for example. But we look at mapping of schools being legislated in many states, for example, that is helpful for pre-incident planning and drilling down for first responders to get into a school and understand how they can get into a school and know what assets are there. However, mapping of schools is also important too for day-to-day operations. We see mapping of schools often in our unified life safety platforms. For example, many access control systems will have a graphical interface, or VM video management systems will have a graphical interface with interoperability for our security and law enforcement staff and our end users, secretaries, and others in the school to understand and interact with the access control video management components and mass notification components. It seems complicated, but what we're doing here with all of these components is making things easier for our school officials to navigate through security technology. We hear often too that people say that these things are replacing people. No, they're not replacing people. They're enhancing the ability of the staff and our stakeholders and districts to utilize this technology in a holistic manner for K through 12. We also look at threat analytics, and that often goes into the weapons detection platforms, but also too, threat analytics are a trend, and we look at, like, for example, facial recognition. A lot of school districts are not using that for things that you would think would be improper, violating students' rights, but they're using this into their threat assessment processes with facial analytics. And recent legislation, for example, in the state of Colorado addressed this point. But also, too, we look at threat analytics is something, too, where we go into biometrics and other factors, too, that have a benefit into the access control platforms as well. We also look at responder access. Many of you have probably seen the first responder numbering system at your schools and your communities or the schools that you serve. And that first responder numbering system is very important because we also can leverage our access control components, our video management components, our mass notification systems, in addition to the 911, E911, and next generation 911 systems that are in our community. So it's very important and very considerate for us to always be cognitive of what the trends are in K through 12 security. However, also the capabilities that go in from each individual school and each individual community.
I'm going to go over to you, Rick, on this question. What are you seeing on the higher ed side? I'd love to get your perspective.
First, I want to say thanks to Guy. Wow. He really is the height of the industry with PASS, and everybody needs to lean into that resource for all of the free information that they have to help you there. And what Guy's really talking about is the paradigm. And if we get back to the essence of the question, you asked about where we are today, and we're not where Guy wants us to be. And so you have to accept that day one. Nobody has a blank check. You can't have all of the gizmos. You can't have all of the things in place at any one time. So what you are best to do is look at what you have and what can you do really budget neutral, maybe in-house, some of the mapping stuff that we talked about, certainly establish a common communication, a fundamental common language with adjacent entities, whether that's law enforcement or nearby school districts. In the context of where I was, it was between the school district and higher ed. Do we have exactly the same emergency action plan language? These are things that you can really do without a whole bunch of money and move the ball toward improving your end product, your ability to protect your end users. And as a part of that, the overarching emergency action plan process, then you can identify maybe some of the physical security components that are lacking. Gosh, we don't have these vestibules in all of our schools or in all of our buildings. We don't have adequate mass notification. We really don't have a good way to communicate to the folks in our buildings or outside of our buildings or coming to our buildings. And so I really think that some of that planning piece, because if you do it in-house, you're improving your ability to understand some of these complex issues and improving your ability to communicate related to these complex issues to the decision makers. And it helps you to then, lobby. We're going to talk about that later too, but to lobby for resources, to get money to make some of the things happen that actually do cost money. And as it relates to all this planning stuff, I don't think it's dramatically different whether it's, K-12, higher ed. I like to have some of those same community conversations, planning with other entities, big hospitals a couple of blocks from my old campus, a couple of big hospitals a couple of blocks from my old campus. There's a children's museum and daycare centers. All of those folks, all of those entities are dealing with the same kinds of things, and just engaging in a conversation to adopt a common language and similar, if not identical, emergency action plans are some things that everyone can do essentially for free. Just a little bit more of your time and energy.
Wayne, let's move on to you just to get your perspective from the locksmith side. What are you seeing? What's going on in the type of work that's and security that's going on in schools? And like Rick said, I mean, every school has a priority list of things they'd love to get. But what are you seeing right now?
Thank you very much. And yes, we've actually worked with Rick at his campus and facility, and they ran a really, really nice ship over there. I mean, it was really, really nice the way that Rick was running things over there on that higher education side. We're looking at where we are and where we want to be is really the main focus of the question. And we need to go back to where we were. Like if on a scale of 1 to 10, where are we as a school? Okay. Do you still have old keyed classroom locks? That's considered pretty dangerous, because now if you do have a threat in the area or a problem, you're going to have to open that door to be able to lock it from the outside. Like that is bare bones basic. We need to move away and upgrade that system to something that we can lock from the inside. That would be like a 1 or 2 as you're coming up the scale. Moving forward from that, are these schools going to be able to just all of a sudden run all new wires and full-blown hardwired access and integrated systems all the way across the school without a massive, massive check? That's probably not going to happen right away. So what are the options for those people? We've got some standalone options, and those are great options. And those are some options that me personally, we've done in the field. We've worked with companies like Convergent, and we've installed. And we basically did all of the Aspen schools. We actually wrote an article. People can check that out in the Locksmith Ledger. I think it was last year. People can check that out. The article on the Aspen schools for K through 12, basically. We did all 3 schools with standalone access and upgraded, got the mechanical off, got the electronic on, and now everything can start communicating. Now we're up closer, in that 4 or 5 category. What comes after that is layers. How do we layer the security together? How do we integrate cameras? How do we integrate, metal detecting systems? How do we integrate people? Can the office manager communicate to somebody outside when that door is locked? Do we have a communication system? Do we have a video system? And each time you add one of those layers, you're going to move up that scale from 1 to 10. Now, are we going to get 10s all across the board? That's very, very wishful thinking and probably never going to happen. But I think we can at least jump away from the 1s and 2s and get up in that 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 category. Moving forward, those are for existing schools. Those are kind of the options for them. Where I see this going in the future is any new schools that are going to be built. This should be part of the plan. If they're not planning it now, they're way behind the 8 ball. They're way behind the game. This should be part of the construction process. Running that low voltage wire, running those data cables, running all of that infrastructure that just wasn't really thought of a decade or 2 ago as actual infrastructure. Low voltage wiring is just as important as plumbing and electrical, as far as I'm concerned right now, moving forward. These are just as important to the maintenance and running of that facility as any of the basic utilities are. So that's where I see things going. And hopefully, as new schools are being built, we can at least have that infrastructure in place. And then once it's in place, then we can just add and upgrade as the new systems come out, because things are going to still change. We've noticed a tremendous amount of change just in the last 5 years alone with what AI can do, pairing what your video cameras can do with your CCTV and pairing that with your access control systems and lockdown. At the end of the day, if you can't lock that school down in 1 minute or less, you're scoring very low on that scale. That's the baseline. So hopefully that kind of gives people a range of where they are, where they want to be, and where they can be based on the budget, and then where we're going with new construction as well.
The guy Rick and Wayne have said it all, and I agree with every statement they said. I'll just cover just a little piece, and I think Wayne said it best. But kind of where we are now, from my perspective, and dealing with a lot of K through 12 and higher education, a lot of schools, believe it or not, are still at the stage of being reactive and inactive. Where we want to get them to is being proactive. So you got a lot of schools now that, yes, it's unbelievable. A new building will commence, it'll be set up, and mechanical keys will be placed on the doors, because that is still the outdated thinking and the legacy of how you lock a door. And I think we're still fighting to get the information to certain decision makers, challengers, and champions about mobile credentialing, about updating to where, I think it was said earlier, you can have access control without wiring every new building, because that's just not feasible. It requires heavy IT lift and heavy IT infrastructure, which is just not the way. There are many solutions out there today where you can take advantage of installing access control with cameras without that heavy lift and not depending so much on wireless. Um, Decentralized access control systems, that is still going on today. You have a multitude of systems on campus today. Neither one is the source of truth or the system of record. They're all feeding in. And where I'm going with that is, when someone is canceled or removed out of a system, who does it? How is that alerted to everyone else? How is that information pushed out to your electronic or connected or integrated devices? Who manages that overall? The system of checks and balances becomes inactive at that point. And then when something does happen and it blows up, now everyone is reactive. So I think what we're all trying to say is, how do we get to a proactive state with all the technology, all the AI is out there, and all the manpower out there? How do we get to a state of, and I try and refrain from using this word, preventing those incidents from occurring, but having the awareness and the proactiveness to mitigate those risks? Where we're going with that, whether we like it or not, it's all going mobile and biometric facial recognition. That's where it's going, whether we like it or not. I'm seeing schools from California to New York adopt a lot of facial for high entry areas such as server rooms, um, daycare facilities where it's very minimal IT staff. And then we're going to areas where the system's not even on site. It's cloud based. I mean, let's talk about that for a moment. The systems are going off site and going into the cloud. And they're integrated with all types of ID verification systems, just in case there's an issue with a parent or a caregiver picking up someone or showing up or signing someone in and out. That's where it's going. So, kind of to wrap it up, because those three have said it best, we need to really get to a proactive state, understanding what that is, and having notification to all those first responders and those users who actually maintain the systems.
Guy, I'm going to go back to you. Just I don't like to put you on the spot like this, because we could spend the whole webcast on just on the new guidelines. See how much has been added, and we were just discussing the number of pages is doubled in terms of what the what's being offered in terms of resources. But the seventh edition, this group has worked tremendously hard. The past folks, including Guy, and just so many people behind the scenes that give up their time. So, as Rick said, thank you to Guy and everyone at PASS. But you can see here just tremendous what's been done, and these guidelines are, Guy will tell you they'll be coming out shortly.
So the past 7th edition updates at a glance. We are on the final draft at this time, so we're hoping in the next week or two that we will release a version 7.0. And what will be the update is we'll be covering access control component updates, such as a new door and lock matrix. Classroom doors closed and locked at all times is one of our top recommendations. and obviously the secure visitor entry center, as we talked about. We have revised our district-wide layers and updates. As one of the general presenters stated, a lot has changed in the last 5 years. When we look at the evolution of school safety, it has been tremendous. So what we are really looking at is the holistic interoperability approach of all of these life safety components to make them work together. Many of the school districts in our country right now are implementing security operations centers. About 30% right now are building some kind of emergency operations center for their school district, and we have an emphasis on that. But again, that emphasis is in the unification of those systems to create that interoperability between the internal stakeholders in the district and the external stakeholders in the district. We think about what every day we hear much about an active threat incident, such as an active shooter incident, but what our focus is on is leveraging these life safety components to deal with the all hazards that take place in K-12 buildings across our country. There is much to do with the video surveillance and component updates. We have updated and enhanced the camera placements, updated the recommended field of views. We also updated our Tier 2 recommendations to Tier 1. So what you saw on Rebeb 6 is now a Tier 1 recommendation. But in addition, as we're talking about here, much has changed in the last several years. And there are many analytics being added to our video management systems from our providers for our K-12 selection when they're selecting it. So we added analytics into how a school district could utilize and leverage analytics for their video management systems and for their school district. We also have covered a classroom camera recommendations. Many people know that a lot of school teachers unions are against camera coverage in their K-12 facilities, but many of them don't know that about 88% of them do have a camera already in their classroom, because after the COVID events, we expanded our e-learning experiences, and now there are cameras in those classrooms. So looking at things like how you could leverage that learning system and combine it with your dress and your access control system. We also did a communication component updates, district-wide approach to unified communication, audio and visual communication, and how this addresses panic alarm. Now, there's many ways to do this, okay? And what we tried to do is take, as we do with every approach in here, we are brand agnostic. We take an agnostic approach, and we recognize there are many ways to do this. And as Rick had stated, often a school district can't afford to get the Cadillac solution that we would say would be a Tier 4. But what we do is we put in common sense approaches in our recommendations for a school district to meet these necessities for their schools. We also, another important area, we are in a cyber age. We all know that. We're talking about AI. We're talking about, how we have to maintain our student records, how we have to curate all of this infrastructure in our schools with all of this technology. And obviously, much of it resides in the digital infrastructure. So that was a significant update for the past guidelines, where we have focused a lot and actually created a new layer of security and called it the digital infrastructure layer. Now, please, folks, this is all free information from the past organization. What we do is we provide this information to K-12 stakeholders, vendors, manufacturers, community members, you name it. Anybody that has a stake in K-12 safety and security can access our past guidelines. You can find that on our website at www.passk12.org. And any questions you may have, we have SMEs that can help. And what I would also say to everybody here, this is not only vendors that have contributed, this is school security directors, law enforcement folks, school administrators, and mental health practitioners in our K-12 environment that have contributed to these guidelines.
Ron, you touched on this, but I'm going to go to Rick first on this one. Looking at the types of systems that are going into the schools today, I know, Rick, on the higher ed side, the phone is becoming everything, in the terms of the credential. My son's school, I remember a year or two ago, he was a freshman. everything went to his phone. He uses it for everything, to get into his dorm room and et cetera. What are you seeing on the higher ed side in terms of advanced?
Couple things. I want to maybe segue a little bit on what Guy was saying, pointed to each specific state. So in Colorado, and Guy will tell you how many, I think it's most, if not all states, have a state-specific office. So in Colorado, it's the Colorado School Safety Resource Center, and they have a tremendous amount of free resources to all of the schools in Colorado, whether it's higher ed or K-12. Free trainings, they'll come out and do audits, security audits. And so as good as passes, there's very, very, very likely local or state resources that folks can have access to. And that said, as we move into the current question, it brings to mind what one of my vice presidents told me a couple of years ago as I was approaching him about the move to mobile credentials. And I'm not going to credit him because I'm going to mess up his quote, but essentially he said, Rick, this isn't a conversation for today. This isn't a technology for today. This isn't a technology for tomorrow. This is a technology for yesterday. We should have been having these conversations years ago so that we can be there today. And that's really kind of our obligation, our role as the subject matter security experts, is to kind of have that crystal ball so we can look at where we should be a few years from now and make, future proofing is, we say it too often, but that's really what we want to try to do. I'll tell you, a few years ago, I worked with agnostic manufacturer for a site-specific encryption code for my smart credential. And at the time, I was assured that it could not be hacked, could not be cloned, and that might have been true at the time. It's not true today. This little gizmo, clone that card, just as slick as a whistle. And so, moving on, I didn't look far enough into the future, and I think that's really where the mobile comes in, is you have a dynamic device that can adapt over time. Are you going to be able to move right straight to mobile? Probably not. The folks that are getting there the soonest are the schools that were behind as it related to technological advancement, because they don't have a lot of online doors. So when they go mobile, it's not much of a lift. My former institution had thousands of doors, and so it's a substantial investment to move 5,000 doors to mobile credential. Now, probably a third of those were future-proofed with multi-tech readers that will read mobile, and that's one of the things that we need to be looking at, talking about, recommending, is as we're recommending those devices, certainly the hardware at the door doesn't care what tells it to lock and unlock, and probably the head end isn't that critical either. Whether you want on-prem, that can have that argument too, on-prem or cloud-based. What you really want to make sure is the reader in the conversation will accept whatever your best guess is to be that mobile credential next. I'm leaning toward near field. I think near field's going to carry the day, but there was lots of folks that thought beta or Super 8 was what was going to carry the day back in the day, and their crystal ball was wrong too. What do the rest of you guys think about the technology that's going to drive mobile forward?
Yeah, that's good. Guy, I'll move over to you because I know it's going to be different on the K through 12 side, the way you leverage this technology, right?
Exactly. So when we're looking at K through 12, the trends, why do we still have a lot of, only 25% of the classrooms in the United States can be locked from the inside? So that's something that's very alarming. We think about the old, how if there's a lockdown and the door is unlocked, the teacher has to go out into the hallway or put their arm out, and he or her has to unlock that door from there if that door is unlocked. So what we're seeing in K through 12 is a combination of the traditional locks and hardware and electronic access control. I would say to folks in here that mobile credentials does have a place in K through 12, but it's not going to be in the way that it is in upper education as it stands right now. We're going to see physical locks with the ability for teachers and students to be able to lock that door from the inside of the classroom. and being able to leverage and see that through an indicator that that door is secured or unlocked at that time. So physical locks are not going to disappear. Why do I say that? Is because, they look at sustainability, and why we see those old locks still in place is because they've true and they've been battle proven and true that they work. But times have changed and they become obsolete. So the case would be that those physical locks, indicators, and that ability to lock from the classroom is so important. And that's not only just the teacher, it's the students that are in there in that classroom being able to be empowered to understand how to lock a door and be able to utilize the indicator to know that that status is in there. But that goes into your human roles and processes where we train it. However, where we see mobile credentials, that's going to be very important when we look at the law enforcement aspect and first responders that are coming to the schools. You think about a school every day in this country, you could have a school district of 30 buildings. You're going to have about 7 to 8 medical calls a day to that school district. That's not, there was a study done out of Boston, the Boston School District in 2022. They had about 12 for their school districts on a daily basis for medical calls that were going on in the schools. So you think about that, it's where people gather. You have anywhere from 20 to 60% of your population, depending on your community, are in those schools. So you're going to have medical situations, you're going to have emergencies and things that first responders need to be able to get into those buildings and help those staff deal with those emergency situations. I would also say to many of the folks in here too, when we look at mobile credentials, we talked about the dress side. And we're looking at our dress partners, for example. A lot of teachers are now going to wearable pendants. And what those wearable pendants is that's an ability for them anywhere in that school or on those school grounds to call for help and get a location to where they are, right? So that's where you see the mobile credentials or electronic access control on the school side is on that exterior of the school of the responders to be in there. Now, many of us in K through 12, we issued fobs to our law enforcement partners and medical and fire department responders. We have Knox boxes, but we also look at a Knox box. The way it's deployed right now is not, for many law enforcement officials, is not conducive to keeping officer safety and tactical response into those schools. And a lot of times too, I hate to say it, fire departments don't want law enforcement into their Knox box. So when we look at electronic access control, that is very important endeavor for K-12 stakeholders right now. How do we get our teachers in the building for day-to-day business, our staff? How do we facilitate playground and all that stuff on a daily basis? But I would also point out to everybody too that many of our staff in our schools, their cell phones are not funded by their school K-12 administration. So, and we look at that, there's a reluctance from folks that if my cell phone is not being paid for by my school district, I'm not being compensated for that, I'm not going to put an app on there. However, for law enforcement, that's very important to have that. That could facilitate do away with the problem we've all had in K-12, which is lost keys, lost fobs, lost electronic access control credentials when we've issued them to our external stakeholders. Another thing I would point out too, one of the most really sound security components is identification of staff members, for example. And what we see is a lot of our credentials are actually our employee ID cards in K through 12, the ones that are there that the teachers wear and the staff wear that identifies them and their position within the district. And that's something that we will never get away from, that I don't see any way that we can in K through 12, is the importance of a staff ID card. And a staff ID card could also be combined with our electronic access control solutions. So there is no way, what I see right now, maybe in 10 years, as we evolved in those last 5 years, perhaps more electronic access control solutions on the doors. I think that it's logical for a K-12 stakeholder to put a electronic access control, but as Rick stated and others, there's a extremely high cost to that. And that's something that we're all going to have to work toward. So what I would recommend, folks, is you look at your risk. Every decision that you do in K through 12 should be based on risk. no knee-jerk reaction. So you look at your facilities and you deploy your unified life safety access control components. You deploy your access control improvements based on risk. So if you have a certain amount of budget, money, you look at where your most risk is, and then you keep building from there. It's like Legos, like a friend of mine says. It's Legos. You're building in there, and you're unifying all of these unified life safety components together.
Ron, your perspective. I'd love to get your opinion on this.
Kind of to revert back to your question, which was the type of locks and security systems that we see. Um, On-prem. So what I've seen is the change in, is the system going to be managed on-prem? Is it in the cloud? Focusing on the type of credential, how secure it is. I think someone said on the call earlier today, they had a credential. They thought it was going to be the end all. It was going to be secure. Then he pulls up his Flipper Zero. I have one of those as well. And here we are now. A student can clone a card in 6 seconds. And then overall student experience is what I'm starting to see. And that's what's been asked by a lot of my champions and challengers. That's great. We have all these cameras, all the security, the classrooms are locked, got metal detectors there. It's wonderful. What does that do to the overall student experience, especially in higher education? They're really concerned about the student, enhancing the student experience. What does that do to it? I think someone said earlier today, it is starting to go the way of NFC versus Bluetooth because it's a tap and go. Students like that experience. It exists on the card, it exists on the phone. And then the security benefit. When it becomes mobile, and I hate to keep harping on mobile, but when I'm brought into a lot of these on-site meetings, the younger generation of IT thinkers and decision makers are bringing that up and they're basing that on mobile. And they're saying, hey, with mobile, we can almost future proof it because of the encryption of it, because it is dynamic, because the lock does not need to be online or wired. It doesn't need to be online, wired, or wireless for certain systems to work with mobile. But I do definitely adhere to the fact of, if it's a personal phone in K through 12, as someone stated earlier today, there will be a challenge with that. And obviously, the security risk is lower with a mobile device because if it's lost, you can cancel it, you can modify it, you can transfer it. There are passcodes, there are authentication, there's biometrics with that. And that's really the way it's going. And then moving the system to the cloud, you have better APIs integration, you have zero trust systems out there that integrate with that. So that's kind of where I'm saying the access control world go. Especially again in the higher ed, it's about student experience. Where in the K through 12, it's about securing the classrooms. And I do agree with the statement that is, if you keep the majority of the doors locked, you won't have to worry about trying to lock them down. And a push button inside the class, a pendant, definitely what I'm starting to see as a trend.
Wayne, I'm gonna make a two-parter for you on this. You kind of talked a little bit about what you're seeing, and please continue that discussion. What the types of work you're doing, and then also, um, I'm also going to move on to the kind of the next question: how you're getting, this work. I know you mentioned Convergent, working with some of the integrators, but just kind of talk about the type of work you're doing and how you're getting these jobs, so the locksmiths can kind of glean some of your expertise there.
Absolutely. Everybody else answered that question so beautifully. There's absolutely nothing else I could add to it for sure. So moving on to that other question is exactly where the locksmith comes into play. Look, they could hand out six-figure checks to every school in the United States right now, and unless that hardware is installed correctly, it means nothing. Okay, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a school and they didn't put mullion stabilizers on the exit devices for the front doors. So while the system says it's locked and it's supposed to be locked down, I just yank on that door really hard and it pulls open. Contractors don't understand this. And a lot of times the sad part is that contractors end up getting the work for putting this hardware on and they have no clue about how it's actually supposed to operate. How many times have we seen locks installed where dead latches don't actually do their job, where locks can be slipped with credit cards? All of this technology means absolutely nothing if the product is not installed correctly. So the locksmith has a golden opportunity, practically a platinum opportunity here, to where if they are recognized as a competent locksmith that knows these systems and knows how to install these systems properly, they're going to get that recognition, and the manufacturers are going to seek them out. And that's exactly how we got that massive job. Is we were on the radar. The company, the manufacturer knew us. The Convergent kind of heard of us as well, and I just happened to have that internet presence, and it just all came to fruition. The best lock on the planet doesn't mean anything if it's not installed correctly, both in functionality and long term of use. These locks, when they're being installed, I mean, we're talking about if you're off a 16th of an inch, if you're off a 32nd of an inch, that lock, you could cut that lock's lifespan in half. And I really don't think people understand how meticulous installing this hardware actually is. So getting a qualified, competent professional is the key to a successful security update or security installation on that school. That's really what we want to focus on, is making sure that they have the right product, they're upgrading that product, and that correct product is being installed correctly. If a locksmith can demonstrate that they can do that, then it's a no-brainer. One other way that I'll speak directly to the locksmiths that are possibly watching this out there is investing in the proper equipment. When we did that massive job, we invested in a jig that costs almost $1,500. But when we're installing 300 plus locks, that's a drop in the bucket. And that jig was absolutely on point and installing everything perfect. We could bolt it on there. That's also in the article that we had. It makes everything absolutely perfect. Those are precision made from major manufacturing, and they're some of the best jigs on the planet. So invest in education, invest in tooling, invest in yourself, and invest in the proper tools to make sure that you're installing the product according to manufacturer specification. The last thing that I'll touch on here is making sure you're using all of the screws and all of the products that come with that lock. If it comes with a screw pack, it was tested at UL Laboratories with that screw pack. That doesn't mean go to your truck and get a self-tapping screw or anything else that you may just pick up off the back of your truck to get that job done. If you don't have the correct part or you lose a part, you need to order that correct part back from the manufacturer in order to maintain that life safety UL listing for it to be approved. That's pretty much the main focal points from the locksmith point of view.
Rick, I wanted to give you a chance to also comment on this one, with all your years experience working at the university levels as a locksmith and then also as a consultant now and running your own company. What's your perspective on this?
Institutional perspective, you can protect the institution by having a solid owner standard specification that requires that the installers be manufacturer certified, right? And you can include in that same owner standard specification that the installation has to be exactly as Wayne described. It has to meet those factory requirements. And if you do that, you're much less likely to see the fella on the 950, Caterpillar the day before installing your hardware the next day, because you don't want to see that as an institutional person. I also prohibited, now some of the locksmiths in the field are going to disagree with me, but I prohibited the use of impact tools to install hardware. Just impact tools are heaven for disassembling door hardware, but it's not an installation tool. And so I had that written in my owner standard spec. And that same guy that was running the backhoe the day before, that's all he knows how to do. Grab that impact, hammer those screws in. And then when they break off, they glue them and stick them in so that it's harder for me to find immediately when I'm doing the punch list walkthrough. And so from an institutional perspective, it's to the benefit, the long-term benefit to guide that construction process where you have competent installers. And if you're not, you're failing.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'm going to stay with you, Rick, on this next question, just because you made a good point about this during our pre-call about, having someone who can, kind of be the spearhead these, the projects, to get kind of everyone on the same page to be able to plan and acquire funding. You've seen it done. Let's talk a little bit about that, just because I know you bring some good perspective there.
the same thing, from an institutional perspective, to gather those stakeholders as it would be for a retail locksmith, right? You're the subject matter expert, and so you have to inform those folks. They don't really know what they want. They don't know what they want as it relates to technology, physical security, or integrated systems. You have to help them with that. Some part of that probably is, back where I started, that emergency action plan that has all of these components. And then you build a list. I'm a big list guy. Go down that list of the things that you don't have. And each step of that way, you're amassing champions to help you argue for that. In the K-12 arena, it might be some teachers, might be the teachers union, but ultimately it's going to be the school board. And so those are just your friends and neighbors, and you have to get those people on board as champions. It takes one, or it starts with one, but eventually you have to get the whole school board on board, because they're going to be voting on that funding that you want to spend to improve the safety to keep all of our kids safe. In higher ed, it's just a different group of decision makers. It's typically the vice presidents or maybe the board of trustees, but it's the same thing. The guy with the subject matter expert doesn't get a vote. And so instead of a vote, what he has is an obligation to try to inform these folks, the decision makers, so that they can make the best possible price value decision and check those things off the list as they're meeting the past guidelines, as they're working with the Colorado Office of School Safety or whatever it is, the guidelines that they're using. Because I can't tell you how many times, whether it's in person or on these kinds of online forums, where I'm talking to the guys in the field and they're just beating their heads against the wall because I know this costs X amount of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions, and they're never going to give it to me. I can't get there. Well, that defeatist attitude is, self-fulfilling. You're never going to get there with that defeatist attitude. With an overarching plan, and then parse that plan down and begin to amass champions, stakeholders invested in. I've worked on legislation at the state level similarly and make those incremental improvements. Could I have done it by myself? Never in a million years. Well, I take credit for any of the stuff that happened. It wasn't me. Just one little tiny cog in a great big machine. So that's what I would say to the guys in the field, especially, is take a step back and think about how you can make this strategy and don't be frustrated because you're not going to have in next year's budget all the money to spend on all of the things that you need and nobody else seems to believe.
Right. And then, Guy, I wanted to give you a minute or two just to get your perspective on the K through 12. You've had to, get a lot of support and acquire, funding for the projects. If you want to add a little bit there.
First of all, the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools, we recommend forming a safe buildings team, for example, before we go any steps. What we do is we gather internal and external stakeholders with different expertise and representing each of the different sections that are out there internally and externally. And when we do that, we always create a leader, a person who is going to be coordinating and going through those voices of different perspectives, for example, of what the risk posture is of that district. The next step as we do that is we do the risk assessment, and we're going to apply and look at what are unified life safety components we're going to be looking at. We're going to identify them through a risk assessment of all of those different perspectives of those stakeholders within the district. Now, like Rick stated, you will have an operations person on that state buildings team. You will have a locksmith, for example. But what we're all doing in K through 12 is looking at these different perspectives and addressing the risk accordingly that it arises in our school district. So if you look at our guidelines, especially the Rev 7, we do cover that, how a recommendation that you can do that. Applying forward.
We have a little bit of time here. I'm going to give everybody a minute just to kind of look at what one big takeaway you want our attendees to take away from this. I'll start with you, Ron. We've discussed a lot today, but what's the one big takeaway from today's discussion for you?
The one thing I would say the takeaway is you have a panel of great experts here. Please listen to them, take their advice, consult with them. Some of the stuff they said here today, I've been in the industry over 20 years, is also refreshing to hear again. It was said earlier, and I agree. An impact gun is not the tool for every solution in every situation. So I do agree with that. I love hearing that. And I'll keep it short. I'll keep it short and sweet. You got to understand your champions and your challenges. Number one, that's going to get you through. And number two, I've done a couple seminars on this. Before you do anything, before you put any lock on door, install any camera, get your challenge and champions in a room and develop a systematic approach to your school safety planning. And that systematic approach, I call it the 5 Ps. You need to understand, what is your planning? What is your process? Who knows about it? What is your protocol? How does that work? Where is it located? Practice it. And the last one, all that should lead to, hopefully, prevention. And then you go forward. So I'll keep it short and brief and pass it on.
Beautiful. I love it. Okay. And then let's move over to Wayne. What's their takeaway? Big takeaway for you?
The big takeaway here is no one single person is a be all end all. It's going to take a team. It's going to take a village. You need to get the proper people that have the proper people in the education facility to talk to the manufacturer, make sure that the product is actually going to meet all of the requirements that they're wanting to meet and solve the problems that they're trying to solve. We need to get in touch with the proper contractors, whether we're running wire to those locations or replacing doors or however deep they're going. You need to have that general contractor, at least a consultation, or have them involved somehow in most cases. And then you need to have the locksmith involved as well, the person who's actually going to put that hardware directly on the door, and make sure that everybody has very, very clear communication about what the end result is. The end result, I always like to start with the end result and work backwards. It's always going to work better that way. So I'm going to try and keep it nice and short and sweet too, but make sure you have the correct people and make sure you have the end result in mind and make sure you have clear, concise communication.
All right. Thank you, Wayne. And Guy, I'll give you a minute for your takeaway.
My takeaway is going to be that when we look at life safety components that are being implemented in a building, it's like the foundation of a house. Access control is the foundation of physical safety and security. Maybe we don't look at it that way, but you think about it. We talked a little bit about analytics. We talked about weapons detection. We talked about address systems. Access control, if those things are activated, think about this. They will not work properly without access control. You know, what do you do if you detect and you activate that address system? You can't get behind a locked door. You can't use an exit to get away from that threat. Or we think about the day-to-day environment of K through 12, for example, of the fear of intraphobia, for example, the unknown of what's beyond that door, and how that can degenerate the learning environment on a daily basis. So we think about that. My takeaway is everyone to realize that all of these other life safety components that are implemented in K through 12 need to be enhanced with access control, and to be effective, access control components must be in place. That's my takeaway. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then last but not least, Rick, your big takeaway for this.
So I would say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? Don't be overwhelmed. Don't look at the past guidelines and be overwhelmed. Don't look at all the deficiencies in your school or your district or your building or your budget and see the deficiencies. Imagine what you can accomplish by putting one foot in front of the other. And thanks for being here today. This is that first step. This is that first bite of the elephant. You're headed on your way to keeping your students safer. And thanks for doing it.
Yeah, and then I did want to get I know we're at time, but we're going to squeeze one question in because I see a good one in here. I'll throw this one up for grabs. This person asked, with the increasing emphasis on layered security and first responder access in the past 7th edition, how do you see the role of portable, no-install secondary locking devices evolving in compliance conversations, especially in districts that lack funding for full-scale infrastructure upgrades?
Well, if I can, I'll take that really quick.
Yeah, Go for it.
Past guidelines and our past recommendations, if we're talking that appears to be about barricade devices, those that are non-compliant, for example, as Mr. Fox and others had stated in here, you know, when you look at that, everything that has a code, it has a something that we meet, and it's also got ADA concerns for our K through 12 stakeholders. We have fantastic information. You can look at Partner Alliance for Safer Schools recommendations around barricade device question. You got to be really careful with the barricades. Some legislatures do authorize specific barricade devices, but there are things that when you think about, they could also be used against the school. For example, I want to sexually assault somebody. I use that barricade device. And now I have to go and breach the door if I'm law enforcement going into there. Or it creates a complication in a search and rescue after an active threat incident, for example, that because the door is barricaded and I can't get in there through EAC or lock or traditional lock and key, I can't get in there. Then I have to blow that door to get in there to do my search and clear of that building. But also too, think about this. We have many children, many staff members that have ADA concerns in Americans with disabilities, okay, in our K through 12 facilities. We need to be compliant for those students as well and for those staff members. And also barricades too can also foster a sense of fear. You know, they're there, fear of in the students, because why do we have that there? You know, for example, I got this big barricade or this device in the floor that secures my door, you know, in an emergency. You know, good old fashioned locks, being able to lock from the inside, and electronic access control can mitigate properly response and day-to-day activities in our K-12 facility.
All right,
So
thank you.
I would quickly interject.
Yeah, go ahead, Rick.
Hard no to barricade devices. Hard no to barricade devices.
Hard no.
Don't waste your resources on emotional purchases. Save it to get things done right.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time. This has been great, and thank you, everyone, for attending. We appreciate it. See you on our next webcast. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.